the Dementia Researcher Podcast, talking careers, research, conference highlights, and so much more.
Hello listeners, I'm Dr Fiona McLean, an Alzheimer's Research UK Fellow at the University of Dundee. And my research interests lie in learning and memory, with a particular focus on neurodegenerative diseases and the links with metabolic syndrome. And I've had multiple grant rejections over the years. So today, to join me to talk about this topic, are three fantastic guests who have also had their fair share of grant rejections. We have Dr Sarah Marzi, a group leader in the UK DRI at King's College London. We have Dr Kate Harris, a research fellow at Newcastle University. And Dr Dayne Beccano-Kelly, a group leader at the UK DRI at Cardiff University. I know long-term listeners of the podcast have met you, but let's start with a refresh and get to know a little bit about each of you again. Can you each introduce yourselves and share what kind of research you do? And we will start with Kate.
Oh, hello. Hi, everyone. I wasn't expecting that. I'm Kate. I am, as Fiona very nicely said, I'm a research fellow at Newcastle, and from December I will be a senior lecturer, which is exciting. And main interests lie in drug discovery for neurodegenerative diseases.
Fabulous. Dayne, can you do a little introduction for yourself?
Hi, so I'm Dayne Beccano-Kelly. I'm a DRI Future Leader Fellow and Group Leader at the Dementia Research Institute at Cardiff University. And my focus is on Parkinson's disease and synaptic dysfunction early in that, to try and identify ways of finding new targets for therapeutic stress. So we should talk, Kate. So that'd be good.
This is one of the fun things about the podcast, is there's collaborations that come out of the podcast itself. And last but absolutely not least, Sarah Marzi.
Hi everyone, I'm Sarah. I'm a senior lecturer at King's College London and a group leader within the UK DRI, and I study the epigenome, so how our genes are regulated, in order to understand how genetic and environmental risk factors impact different neurodegenerative diseases.
All super cool research, and I love all your areas of research so much. But today we are actually here to talk about rejection, and specifically grant rejection, which I've had many, many times myself, and I hope you all don't mind me saying, but I think you will all have had a lot of grant rejections yourself. For those of you listening on the podcast, there's a lot of nodding going on. So let's just jump right in. Let's talk about it, let's unpack it, and let's see if we can find some positives in the rejection as well. So let's start with Dayne. So can you remember sort of how it felt for the first time when you had a grant rejected, especially one that you'd worked on for quite a while? How did it feel? What was the project idea? Give us a wee introduction to it.
We'll probably come onto it later as well, but having some rejections, it doesn't stop when you get any level of seniority. I mean, I've had a couple of rejections a couple of months ago, so it's still happening right up until now. So those are very fresh in the memory, and the wounds are still sore. But one of the first ones I ever did was actually when I was in Dundee, and I was applying for a fellowship to look at hypoxia in an Alzheimer's model, and to look at electrophysiological changes because that's something that I was marrying up with my previous PhD work alongside my then current postdoctoral work. And as you said, I kind of put a lot of effort into it, and a lot of time was spent writing it, and a few different iterations, and I was handing it out to different people to read it. And I thought, as we all do, by the time it got to the finished, uploadable final copy of it, that it was, stellar. It was shiny and it was polished, and it was like, there's no way I'm not getting this. That sort of false sense of sort of like grandeur behind your work, but it's only because you've worked on it so well for so long, and you think you've got rid of all of the different caveats to it. So when I did hear back that I hadn't got it, it is, it can be quite crushing. There are different ways to deal with it, and it was a little sad would be a very British understated way of saying how I felt at the time, I think. But, yeah.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, yeah, I think you've kind of summarised the feeling that you actually have before you get the rejection, which is, usually you're putting in a grant that you've worked on for a really long time.
Yeah.
And of course you believe in it. That's why you wrote it.
Absolutely.
And like you say, especially those bigger grants, maybe fellowships, big project grants, you work on them not just usually by yourself, but with multiple people. So it builds up your confidence in that grant. I actually think that's one of the tricky things, is because you have that confidence and people around you believe in it as well. When it does get rejected, it makes you kind of be like, what?
How dare you? Yeah, that's not possible. And so, I think there's also the element, it's tied so deeply with something that we're all in science, likely because we all sort of care passionately about science or are nerdy about it. So it's almost like sometimes it can be like it feels personal, like an affront to you. And so you're like, oh my God, so you feel really low after it. It's quite hard to do that thing of dissociating yourself from, it's not an attack on you as a person. It's just, that was not the right thing at the right time. So,
I think as well, though, it depends what type of grant. So I find project grants are less personal, but rejections on fellowships I've found a lot more difficult. And the first big piece of really big grant I wrote was for a fellowship, a very well-known one in the UK, which shall not be named. And I really believed in it. I had that people around me being like, this is really good, this is really exciting. And it didn't even get past the first round. But just to explain the structure of that. So basically there was multiple rounds and there was such a short turnaround time between finding out if you'd passed the first round and getting ready for the second round, that you kind of had to prepare for the second round before you'd even found out if you'd got past the first round. So I put a lot of work and energy into not presuming, but just getting ready for that second round in case I did get through. I remember finding out I hadn't, and it was right after I'd had a really long meeting about it and getting prepared for it. And I opened my emails and had the rejection there. And it's, I'm not embarrassed to say it, but I burst into tears, and I was standing in the middle of Dundee on Perth Road, for anyone who knows the area well. And it's a very public area. And I remember some local people stopping and asking, are you okay? And I was like, no, I'm not okay. And they were like, do you need help? And I was like, not the kind of help you can offer.
I need funding. That's what I need.
Funding for my research. And having a meltdown, to the point that my now husband had to come and pick me up and take me home because I was actually so devastated. Now, in hindsight, I think I was quite sleep deprived from trying to get the grant in, the fellowship in. But what I would say is from that, I received a lot of really helpful feedback. It took a wee while because you tend to get the rejection, and then it's a couple of weeks later or a month later, you might get some feedback. And funders who are really good will make sure, especially ECRs, get that feedback. Because then I was able to take that feedback. Once I'd dissociated myself a bit from it and felt less personal about it, I was able to be a bit more objective, listen to what the reviewers had said, apply it, and then I actually rewrote that application, and then that was the application that did get funded by Alzheimer's Research UK in the end. So as much as my own experience, from as devastated as I was, it actually really did help the process, and the grant that did get funded was much, much better, much better written than the one that did go in. What I will say, though, is that one of the reviewers in that first one got very personal, and that can happen. So just to bring Sarah in, so have you had a grant? Just give a wee bit of a brief background on it. And specifically, did you get feedback, and were you able to use that feedback, and how did you use it?
I was actually just going to come in on your, it did get personal. My very first grant rejection was so painful. And I still don't think I got much useful out of the feedback there. It was just personal. And it was an MRC New Investigator grant when I, about...
Naming and shaming.
Yeah, go for it.
Looking at you, UKRI.
Yes, well, it was the reviewers. So we're not naming anyone because they're anonymous, but... and it was on Parkinson's and pesticides and looking into organoid models of pesticide exposure. And actually it was really innovative. I think it could get funded now, and nobody has done anything like this. Yes. And but basically, I had just started my lab with my fellowship a year earlier or so. And so all the negative feedback was sort of, does she even know what she's doing? She's not worked on Parkinson's before, and does she even know how to lead a group? So I haven't found any of that particularly beneficial or helpful in designing my future grants and going forward. Those things I can address better now because I've led a group for longer and I've had output, so I can prove that I can lead research. So actually, there are things that just with time and experience become easier, I think.
Can I just say something that's really frustrating, though, is that is a new investigator award.
Yes,
yeah,
exactly.
For new investigators. And something that frustrates me a lot is when sometimes you feel like the reviewer hasn't maybe understood the remit of what the application is.
Yeah, absolutely.
I had a criticism on one of mine one time that said my salary was too high, but I was still a postdoc at that time, and it was a postdoc salary. It wasn't a grade up. And I was like, this is so unfair. Like, what should I get paid for having my own money, my own
fit
fellowship?
Into whatever criteria this person has for you,
And that was my sort of personal irk. I was like, you don't know me. Like, I didn't think it was unreasonable. Just asking for a continuation of actually what I was already on as a postdoc. So, my point is, it'd be nice if they could read the remit. Sorry to interrupt here. So I guess that feedback didn't really help.
That was not an answer to your question at all. That was not very useful. I'd say the only useful feedback, well, no, there was some scientific feedback. And actually, I'm writing not the same grant, but something in a similar vein at the moment. And one of the things that was highlighted a lot in that grant by the reviewers was they really wanted us to look into sex-specific effects. And we had put that in, but we hadn't really made it obvious that we were going to do stratified analyses and look, because I think that's something that you would do by default anyway, but I didn't. So that was my inexperience in grant writing. Now, when I write variations on this, I would put that in very explicitly and say, we will look stratified at the sex differences. And it is actually really important. So maybe I learned a little bit of something, but overall it was, and also the recovery time from that grant until I was ready to write another grant was incredibly long, and it's been getting shorter, luckily.
That resilience as you sort of get rejected more and more. I always say to people, I sometimes tell sort of ECRs that are coming up under me, you do build resilience. And I talk about that first one where I had a meltdown, whereas now I'm like, oh, another rejection, cool, next. So sometimes I'm like, maybe I'm dead inside now, I don't know. Academia took my soul and made me not care. But no, anyway, that's aside another part.
Or it's also about, I find, having multiple things cooking at the same time and overlapping things going in. So that when you get rejected, you're like, but I still have these other things that are still in the running.
I completely agree with that. I think that the ability to have that going, though, is it comes with an increased level of seniority, right? When you're a postdoc and you've probably put in all your eggs in one, maybe two baskets, and so maybe it hurts more at the beginning stage. Yeah, I would completely agree. Though, if you're going to do multiple things, then you can one can drop. Yeah, it's still can sting a little bit depending on which one it is that gets dropped.
Absolutely. And another word I just want to pick up that you said, Sarah, was explicit. And I think that's something I've learned as well, is sometimes you can be so in a grant and so into a topic that you forget what information needs to be explicitly stated for the reviewer to really get what you're saying. So I've also learned that from reviewers, is sometimes you need to just be super obvious, even if you think it's already obvious. And Kate, would you come in and just tell us about sort of that first grant that you put in and maybe got rejected? And did you learn from that feedback? How did you pick yourself up from it?
Okay, so I actually have a rejection self-care regime.
Set of steps
it's a
to take.
Set of steps. I now don't need it every time because, like you, I'm like, I'm due a rejection. Like, I don't know. I wait for it, if I'm honest, which I know sounds a bit depressing, but hopefully sooner or later something will stick. I will admit that I'm on a bit of a journey at the moment of and we might come on to this, like interdisciplinary grant writing is a whole world. And I have yet to really convince anyone that I'm capable of doing both. That is the feedback that always comes back. It doesn't matter how many years I've had a chemistry and a biology lab, there is always that doubt. Like, she can't possibly do both.
That's frustrating.
That is very frustrating.
Especially with this sort of remit of grants being very cross, discipline now. And you're like, hello, I'm cross-discipline. And they're like, no.
My first one was another fairly well-known fellowship that I went for, and I was so excited. And I think, again, it's that first one that hits the hardest, because I had been very fortunate up until then. I had got only my second postdoc that I applied for. The first one I didn't even really care about. I was in a place where people, because I did my postdoc in Oxford, I don't even know how I got that. Literally still to this day, don't understand how I got that.
You're great. That's why you got it.
That's very kind, but no. And, everything kind of came quite easy for a while. And I just thought, I was told, well, if you've got a great idea, you'll get funded. Those lovely pieces of advice you get given. And I was so proud of this idea. And my collaborators and my sponsors were so excited by the idea. They were like, this is going to change dementia. And it was this idea of, what if you do mass spectrometry on the vesicles that are excreted from microglia to see whether or not the amyloid has actually been broken down, or whether they're just having it whole and then spitting it back out and therefore not making any difference to inflammation. And there was precedent for all of it. Very excited. And I was like, yeah, but I really want to move into that area, blah, 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 blah. And I'd been culturing stem cells myself for a couple of years. I had taught myself in my postdoc, but I'd been doing it for a couple of years and it had been going well. So there was data. And I had, the world leaders in the field backing it. I was just so excited. I was like, we're going to go for microglia function. We're going to talk about it like that, not about immunology and blah, 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 blah. No M1, M2, we're going to get to the heart of it. And then with that fellowship, you found out if you'd got an interview on a certain day. And I remember literally having knots in my stomach. I was having panic attacks all day, being like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. And then I didn't get a message, and I knew. I hadn't even had the rejection. I just knew. And I'd already started preparing the video I was going to create for the interview and all these kinds of things. And they wanted something innovative. They wanted something interdisciplinary. But
did you ever get feedback though? Did they,
yes.
apart from them saying oh, can you do both? Did you get feedback, and did that help? Were you able to use that feedback?
I think what I learned was that in interdisciplinary research, it is very hard to cater to everybody. Chances are what you're going to get is you're going to get an expert from one field. And I'm sure you have this as well, Sarah. I'm just thinking about trying to convince data scientists and epigenetic, bringing that together. And what can often happen is that because you're sort of doing both, and there's a lot of implicit knowledge, is you sound like you are not good at either, when actually in reality what you're doing is going, that bit of detail is kind of unnecessary at this point. Please trust that I know what I'm doing.
Yeah, and that's where interviews can be really good. And unfortunately, that's what you don't get with project grants. You get them typically with fellowships. So you have a bit of a chance to, if you get past the first few rounds to the interview stage, you have a chance to really justify why actually you can bring two areas together. That's what frustrates me about project grants a bit more, is that you have usually less space and less opportunity to explain that.
Unless it's a program grant, in which case you do, but those are obviously massive.
Yeah. And I guess that comes down again to funding, but also this is something that we should say to listeners, is there's a lot of luck involved. It really depends and I mean that in the sense of it depends whose desk the application lands on. Because if it's someone who believes in that idea, then that's great, or finds it really exciting, they're going to be slightly more positive. If it lands on a competitor's desk, which it can often do, because if you work in the same field, you might end up with a reviewer that is an expert in that field. One of the things I get really paranoid about is, what if this lands on a competitor and they, don't want to fund it because they feel it's too close to what they're doing.
Do you really think people do that?
I think the cynic in me says potentially.
I just surely think the more people doing great work, the better.
You would hope so.
You would hope so, right?
I do think
naivety.
I do think there's a lot of different personalities in academia. And when I'm reviewing a grant, I like to just think of, the idea, is it the right person? Is it the right place? Is it achievable? Like, is there, for example, examples of pilot data that shows that the techniques will work even if it's not in the model, for example, that they want to do? That's what I look for in a good grant. But you just don't know how some people are. And I think tone of review can sometimes give a lot away on whether someone's been on your side or is rooting for you.
This is my review face.
I think that there's there can be that fear. You've reviewed grants before as well, as you just said, but I think there's quite a lot of the time, just in case people at home don't know how it's working, you usually get this, you'll apply with whatever bids you're making, and then it will get distributed by like program and project managers from that particular institution that you've applied to, and it will land on the desk of not one, but more like 2 or 3, what you'll end up calling introducing members, who will then review it. And they'll all give it a grade, and then they'll usually have to justify it at the sort of collective meeting. And so it becomes a little harder, I think, to sync somebody's project if you have a vendetta, because you've got to make the argument to the other interviewing members if the scores are really dramatically different from each other, which is what would happen if somebody was trying to sync your stuff. And so usually you can get the other way around as well, by the way. Somebody might want to try and like artificially elevate your stuff as well, right? Which is, sounds nice, but I mean, it's kind of is one of those things where, because they'll have 2 or 3 members, you'll have sort of an average score. If everybody's score is in line and it's below a cutoff, then everybody's is in line. But if there's a disparity, then they'll want you to defend why you've given that score. So hopefully it gets rid of that sort of thing, which is quite good.
There is a huge move, isn't there, now to root some of this out. So that's actually a really important thing, I guess, for our listeners, is we kind of came up professionally in a time when maybe things were a little bit different, and maybe before that big, well, not before, but around about the time that big Wellcome Trust of Reimagining Research article came out, and when a lot of sort of things were starting to have attention paid to them. So I think there's been a lot of work done. Obviously, everything can always be improved, but there is work and emphasis now being highlighted on the tone of reviews and who things are going to. I know when I review, they even, say, look, we don't look for this, we do look for that. So there is hope. We do bear scars, and everyone bears scars because, like you said, it's so personal. And even if it's not personal, it feels personal. But there is a lot of hope.
I think funders are becoming more conscious of having like grant boards, not just, a couple of reviewers. They do have boards to sort of review the reviewers in a way. And I think that those steps are really positive as well. And making sure that the reviewers also have guidance. And I think that's really key as well. So when you got rejected, out of 3 of you, did you tell anyone? Did you tell colleagues? Yep, Sarah's nodding, Dayne's nodding.
Yeah.
Kate's looking less sure. Dayne and Sarah, did you find it beneficial to tell those colleagues?
Yeah. So I sort of peer networks and peer support groups are so important for everything you do in academia and figuring out how to run your own lab. And so for sure, having those sessions, because everyone will get rejection. So you have a lot to share together and commiserate and vent maybe a little bit. So sort of this idea of shared suffering is less suffering.
And that's something I prefer about putting in grants which are maybe a project grant where there's co-PIs, because then you can all commiserate together and all say, hey, how did they not fund this? It was amazing. And again, I guess that's where it maybe comes in with fellowships, or maybe a little bit more personal. Dayne, how did you find telling colleagues? Did you find that beneficial?
again, it depends on which phase you're at. I suppose if you're doing something now, it's likely to have co-Is on it, so you're gonna have to tell at least some people, right, that our bid didn't get through or whatever have you. So, but when it was more, as you say, like a fellowship that was personal, I did tell people, not least of which would be mentors, and they would be really good in giving you pep talks, or if you've got good mentors, that is, giving you pep talks that are, that can help you revitalize your enthusiasm for resubmitting the bid elsewhere, or breaking it down into pieces, and or maybe going over any reviewer comments that you did get back. It's quite interesting when you guys are talking about the reviewer comments coming back. I've applied to a number of different places that have often just not given me any review information, and I was going to say, which one do we theoretically prefer? Do you want it to be personal attacks, or do you want it in inverted commas, or do you want nothing back at all? Which is that's not.
Nothing's worse, I think.
Yeah, I think so
nothing's
too.
worse.
Because one of the things I found useful is taking the reviewer comments to a colleague, and then, or multiple colleagues, and then them being the ones to say, actually, this is a good point, this is a good point, ignore this is irrelevant, or this is too picky, or they've not understood the remit, to almost help me understand what is relevant in the comments as well. Because I think if you took everything on about everything that's said, it can maybe change the grant too much, or I think if things have been misinterpreted from your grant, you don't want to build that back into the grant. You want to just make sure that the grant, as we said earlier, is maybe more explicit about certain things. So that's something that can be really helpful. And so out of everyone who's had a grant rejection, say maybe a rough percentage so we can try and quantify it a bit, but how many grant rejections have you taken on to resubmit and kept the idea, and how many have you dropped? So say, what's the percentage of grant ideas that you have continued to try and get funded? Sarah?
I'm a terrible example because I just spread too widely. I would say for me, it's quite low. It's maybe like 20%.
So you like coming up with a fresh idea. If something doesn't work, you think, right, actually, I'm going to try something new.
It's not exactly the same then. Like, it feels like it might have elements and experiments that would have been in the other grant, but with a new remit and a new story. I do, and even the ones that were rejected, so we're talking now about 5 years worth of rejections. I still have them, and I go back to them for different pieces and elements, motivating things. How did I describe? Sometimes even how did I calculate the sample size or things like that. So they are useful, and they're giving me information for my other grants. And I might come back actually to the specific projects, but it might have been too early to do some of them. So one of my things that I've learned is that actually you want a good solid base of pilot data and previous research that motivates the exact next step for many of the funders. Very few of them want super blue skies, high risk research. And so that's something that I had to learn, because I thought the most exciting stuff is really innovative and really out there. And for those, maybe I'm still spending the time now to build that base to then maybe come back to them.
I completely agree. You almost need a little bit of each aim started. And certainly for myself, I found the technique needs to be proven. It's very unless you've got a grant that's specifically to develop a technique or technology. I think you have to have that in place, because grant funders want to see good mitigation. And that's part of it, is knowing that technically you're able to do it in the environment that you're proposing to do it in. Kate, what about yourself? How many ideas have you kind of left behind? How many have you reworked or taken forward?
I think I might be the opposite of you, Sarah. That's really interesting. I'm a bit like a dog with a bone. And I wanted to share at some point in this podcast a really positive experience I've had about reframing an idea in the journey I'm on, if that's okay, because maybe in a little bit of a later thing.
Go for it now. Tell us about it.
So basically, like I said, I'm on a bit of a grant writing journey, so I'm hopefully failing forward, but we'll see. And what it was is, and we were talking about no feedback versus feedback, and I've been getting the same kinds of feedback, internal, external, people like, well, we don't know what she's trying to do. And then that combined with the fact that you're transversing disciplines or whatever. So what I did, absolutely terrifying, it was a savage week, was I took my latest application to someone that I knew was quite hard to please.
I think that's a good approach.
Oh my goodness, I felt so destroyed after they read it through, because it was like pages of critique, but I needed it. And it was done very kindly, but it was like, no, this is not good. And what we got to the crux of it was that I was assuming too much knowledge.
Yeah.
And they were like, they were saying, you're writing. I think they used it at the analog being like, at the moment, people act like they want art house film, but in reality, they feel safe with a Marvel. And you're art house in a world of Marvel. Like, you have got to meet them part way. You've got to convince them that you're bringing not 2, but now 3 disciplines together. It is a hard sell. Like, people who know you can do it.
Sure.
But you have got to convince people that you have this capability. You need the pilot data and you need to be articulate.
Yes.
And I was like, and he was like, and I remember talking to him and he went, look, when you speak, it is unbelievably clear. When you write, I just don't have a clue what you're trying to do.
Yeah. I actually think that's one of the most important lessons from that failed fellowship that I was talking about previously to the one that got funded. One of the biggest changes I made was in the structure of my writing. So I was writing in paragraphs and I just changed it more to a bullet point and title style. And I always show it again with any ECRs that I'm mentoring. I show them the 2 different applications. I'm like, this one got funded and this one didn't. If you read the content for this section is actually almost identical. The main difference is it's written in a different style. So I think your point there, Kate, is absolutely crucial. It's not just what you write, it's how you write as well. And actually that's been a really good thing that you've done, is go to that colleague to get that feedback.
I was going to say that's it's hard to do that, right? To give something again over to somebody you love who you know that is going to tear it apart, but you need it to be honest.
You want them to like you as well. So, I went in there and I was secretly wanting them to be like, oh my gosh, you're so impressive.
Yeah.
And particularly where I work, where I do a lot of work with research culture, and that's what I'm more visible for rather than the science. Not that I don't do the science. I work very hard on it, but I kind of feel like that's a given. So I don't really publicize it, whereas I publicize the research culture. I just really wanted them to be like, oh, she's such a good scientist. And then I got it back and he was like, I don't know what this is about. But it got better, if this is an interesting. So then it came out in a conversation that there are colleagues within the department who don't actually think that my field really has any point.
Wow.
And that people, no, I think that's fine, because you need a healthy skeptic in your life. And then this reviewer said, well, that is a person who's supposed to be on your side. They're in your general area. That is a dragon you have got to slay, because there will be reviewers who also think the same way. So then I had a 1-hour conversation with someone I absolutely adore and really want to respect me, but also has a lot of critiques of the way that not the way I do anything, no, not at all, but like the field, and was like, right, why don't you like this?
But I think that's interesting to the field of dementia in general, because, I work in metabolism, as I said, and it took a long time, for years, to convince people that type 2 diabetes and obesity were a factor in dementia. It took years, but now it's very accepted. There's been the Lancet paper that came out about lifestyle. And so I always think it's really important to keep an open mind with grants if you're both reading them and writing them, because the field shifts, and, it would be a shame to miss something important, especially with diseases like dementia where we don't have effective treatments and we don't have a cure. You don't want to shut any doors that might be really important. And I think actually, as a field, dementia has become a lot more aware, and we are thinking about stuff like pesticides, and those environmental factors, plastics, stuff that we weren't considering before. We are now considering. So that's more for a researcher to shut off a field, in my opinion. But I just want to move on to just talk about how those rejections have impacted you. Has anyone actually thought about leaving academia because of a rejection? I've certainly been in a situation where I've maybe been almost forced to leave because I've not maybe had a job because I've needed a salary, and I've been very fortunate that it's always come through in the end. But has anyone ever thought, I just don't want to deal with these rejections, I'd much rather do something else?
I've not thought I don't want to deal with it. I've thought I will never be good enough. I should leave.
Oh, no.
Wow. Yeah.
But you're still here. So.
I'm still standing.
Yeah, I was literally going to break into song with you then. But,
Yes.
I'll stare. Everybody
I'm
there.
so glad we met. I'm so glad we met.
What
But
about yourself, Dayne? Have you ever thought
No, because I'm
back?
belligerent and just keep going. No, no.
You need to be.
I think there is something to be said for the fact that you kind of have to. It's easier said than done to have the resilience to just go right. It landed on. So when you were speaking earlier about it being luck and where it's landing, another thing is it might be that funding agency, it's just not the flavor of the month right now, and they're trying to look to push towards some other areas, or and so what. Again, to tie into something that was said earlier, like have I ever resubmitted grants? I have, to the same funder before, and I've reworked it and then been successful, right? So it just goes to show that you could do something in consecutive years, consecutive rounds, and it be torn down one time and then elevated the next. So I think because that actually happened to me fairly early on, and I'd already been coached in the fact that could happen, that the sort of actually seeing it happen made me go, if I do get rejections, it doesn't mean that I'm actually a failure with my ideas. It's just that it could have landed in the wrong place. I've not styled it right for that particular agency, for that particular panel. So, it's to carry on is easier when you know that, it's not you, it's them. So it's kind of like, it's one of those things where, it's a breakup. It's not you, it's them. It's definitely them.
It's not me, it's them.
Yeah, it's definitely them.
They're the problem.
Yeah. I'm brilliant.
So I always say that I think my experience on dating apps really helped me handle rejection in academia, because I think once you've been through some brutal rejections on Tinder or other dating apps are available, I was like, it just builds up the resilience. You're like, I'm not the problem. These people are the problem. And Sarah, so what about yourself? Have you ever felt like leaving, or has it actually even made you more ambitious in a way?
So I don't think I've felt like leaving. I was just thinking back when you asked that question to a moment when I was also my very first year of independence. I was on holiday in Mexico at the time, but I really wanted to put in a grant, and it was a collaborative grant at the time. And I worked for like a week during my holiday in Mexico I didn't work the whole day. I did like 4 hours every morning, and then I went out, and then I didn't get the grant, didn't get any feedback. It was so not worth it. I had such regrets of having worked on my holiday, and I kind of try and not do that anymore if at all possible. I guess part of me at that point, the applications I was putting in, I wasn't being very selective. I was going after the big things that people were talking about. But I think I've become way more savvy about going for grants where I know my chances are better because of the remit of the funder, like where I and my research fall in within what they're interested in, because of how many people I think will be applying. So lots of different little factors. And I've become more opportunistic about that, I'd say, and not just go for, this is the big name thing that everyone is going for. And because everyone is going for it, it's going to be terrible odds. It's going to be like 5% funding rate. And then is it surprising that I didn't get it? Not really.
I think that's a really good point as well. It's actually not just the remit itself, but also is there anything that you can do to put yourself in a position of being more successful? And I find one of the easiest things to do is to speak to, usually there's a program coordinator linked with the grant, speak to them ahead of time and say, I'm intending on applying for this. Do I fit in the remit? Am I at the right stage of my career? This is my idea. This is a rough outline of my idea. Is this the type of thing you're looking for? Because that can save you a lot of time.
You're absolutely right. People are scared to do that as well. and they feel like you're not supposed to approach people.
Do that.
No, you've got to do it. You should do it. That's the absolutely right thing to do, Fiona. I think you should.
And a lot of time they're so nice and supportive as well.
I've occasionally been like, I've thought about doing it, or I've sent it like a little thing and been like, but I've never, or I've put in like a general remit inquiry, which I now do with UKRI because I feel like they always have to decide where I'm going to go. But like to actually have that really honest conversation of this is the idea, blah, 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 that can be quite intimidating. So to know that it's worth it.
Yeah, I think you've highlighted a really important point there, actually. If you are doing multidisciplinary work, especially if you're going to UKRI.
Remit inquiry.
Where does it go? Does it go to BBSRC? Does it go to EPA? Does it go to MRC? Does it go?
Or even within the MRC, which one is the board that you're going for?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So every single time I do it, because otherwise I find that I very easily get told I'm not in remit. Fair enough. But then if you've kind of put it in and they've said it can come to this, then you've got that evidence that they've already kind of agreed.
And sometimes they can tell you about future funding calls that aren't even announced yet. And they can say, actually, you're not quite right for this one, but we are releasing a call in 6 months that this would be better for. You should prepare for that. So I'm all about cold emailing people and asking. I think it's really helpful.
Guys.
Fully on board with this.
So much.
Because they're there to help you, right? They're there to help you. So.
And they want the best grants.
Yeah.
They want to fund the best work. Yeah. So it works for both sides, I think. So just to talk a little bit about sort of failing and the culture in academia and research to build on that. So do you think that we talk about failure in research enough? And, is there a change in culture in terms of, is it, do we talk about failure as a positive thing, a negative thing? Does it impact our career trajectories if you admit that you fail? Dayne, why don't you comment on this?
I don't know if it's changed. I've always had senior investigators, mentors tell me that they've had hundreds of grants put in and only won like 10% of them. And so it's one of those things that I've heard for a long time. When it comes to that, if we're talking about papers and manuscripts, I think that might be slightly different. But when it comes to bids and grants, I personally feel like people have always been honest and open. I think that's a good thing. I think it helps to normalize when you do get a rejection that you can speak about it with people. I don't know if that's been other people's experience, but I would certainly think that it's got to be something that's continued. I mean, I've opened my door and the topic of fellowship writing by PhDs and my postdocs, of which, those that have wanted to go through it, I've started coaching them and trying to take them through it and getting them to write mock ones and trying to take them through the idea of doing that. And I've shown them my previous ones that did get funded, a bit like you, Fiona, and ones that didn't get funded, that you show them two together, right? And I think that it's important to do that because, first of all, you can see what the difference is and what might have changed. But secondly, just to show that, perhaps people may think, possibly of you guys and not me, that you're untouchable, right? When you've got to the senior levels, you must just be throwing these grants out and that people are, just accepting it left, right, and centre. But it doesn't work like that. So you need to be able to, if they, come back and go, well, they got rejected, and like, welcome to the club. Like we'll repackage it, we'll send it somewhere else. We're going to get this funded because I believe it's a good idea. Let's see what they said. Let's break it down, and maybe let's try and partition it, package it up so it can go to multiple different places. This is not the end. And so I think to know that, people senior above you have had the same experience is critical to how you gain and build resilience yourself. Yeah,
absolutely. I couldn't agree more. What about yourself, Sarah? What do you think?
I think similar experience as Dayne. That they are having rejections. I've not had so much exposure to this is a good grant and this is one that didn't get funded. So I'm learning this myself. I've seen successful grants, mainly a few examples, but that sounds extremely useful what you're doing for your mentees. That would have been quite helpful. I feel like people also don't as often share what their comments were and why they got rejected. But I think it's very widely accepted that failure rates are very high, and I don't think within my surrounding nobody would feel embarrassed that a high number of grants get rejected, because that's just by statistics, that's what's expected, and you're just expected to put in enough that you do get funded.
And yourself, Kate, like, because you say that you've got a good experience sort of dealing with research culture and trying to improve it. Do you think that there is a shift in sort of failure and how it's perceived in academia and the pros and cons that can come from it?
Do you wonder if maybe there's a bit of disciplinary difference here? Because my primary discipline is chemistry, and I would say that my experience has been not yours in the terms of openly admitting that things don't work. A lot of it is about showing strength. And so, you'll have people say, I haven't had a grant rejected in 5 years, and then you'll find out that 80% were. So it is a different way of looking at things. I don't know why that might be, but so for me, actually hearing that this is a thing is delightful. But as part of our research culture, we are trying to normalize it. So recently in a talk that I gave, I said I got rejected from 7 fellowships before I got this one at Newcastle. And that was actually quite a shock to people. They were like, oh my goodness, you admitted it in public. So there's definitely work being done to try and normalize rejection. Certainly when you get rejection, people find out, then people might go, oh yeah, I got rejected too. I don't know. Did anyone find that with their driving test? Everyone pretended they passed first time until you got rejected, until you failed. And then everyone was like, yeah, it took me 4 times. So I think, with the research culture, one of the things we're trying to normalize is failure and accessibility. So it feels like, because especially in the world that we're in academia now, you have to be excellent. And it's trying to redefine that concept of excellence. What is it? So we're trying to make it normal. We're trying to make accessible, sounds like a strange word, but I want people to look at role models and go, I can see myself in them. And many of us can't see ourselves in these classically, stereotypically brilliant people that we admire, and actually finding that they're more human, I find empowering, because it means that there is a way forward.
I think as well, in sort of a practical sense as well, I know one thing that Dundee is trying to do, the research service is trying to do, is allow access to grants which have been successfully funded from grant boards that you are looking to apply to. So that, because as we said, each funder can have sort of a specific style of writing they like, or specific things they look for. I find that charities look for more kind of maybe a broader package of your research, but how does that fit in with public engagement, with impact, with policy? Whereas some of the UKRI ones can be a bit more sort of technique, science funded, science focused, sorry. So I think also tailoring the kind of extra information that you build into an application can sort of be dictated by the funder as well.
Honestly, our research funding team are insanely good at that. They have a stockpile, and it makes such a massive difference.
Good bit of advice for any ECRs in particular listening, especially if you've not written a grant before, is approach your research services and ask them, do you have any grants that I can read that went to X funder? And then it just gives you an idea of, the writing style as well, as we were talking about earlier. So just to move on for sort of resilience, we've kind of touched on. How do you sort of mentally prepare for rejection? You said that you had some steps, Kate.
I want to hear these.
I have some post-rejection steps.
And how do you distinguish between just needing a break or, completely moving on from an idea? So, we'll start with you, Kate. So, how do you sort of mentally prepare, and then how do you decide after a rejection, do I move on or do I keep going with this?
First thing I was going to say is I found it just really interesting on the topic of resilience. Do you think, I wonder that if our experiences of how failure is normalized for us might buy into why potentially the three of you look at an idea and go, I'm not going to give up on this, I'm not going to leave, versus me going, I'm not good enough, I should leave. I wonder if actually the narrative of how failure is framed to us might have had a huge part in that. And this is why I need a self-care routine, because for me, every time I fail, it's like, this is another nail in your coffin, kind of thing.
I understand that, yeah.
But, so, failure routine. It used to involve a unicorn-themed onesie back when I was earlier career, but since having babies, I no longer fit in said unicorn-themed onesie. Now it involves a very fluffy dressing gown. The Vampire Diaries, please don't judge everyone, it's who I am. Specific Ben & Jerry's, it has to be fish food.
Yes, I was sorry. I really judge people on what flavour they pick, and for me, fish food is peak, absolutely peak. So sorry to interrupt. Yes, so correct answer.
You have to have that chunky, the crispy, chunky, chocolatey bit, and endless Professor Layton or Stardew Valley on the Nintendo Switch, and I do that for a good 24 hours. My husband is a patient, kind man, not so much with the kids now because they don't care. They're like, I've had a poo, wipe my bum. And I'm like, okay, fine, rejection's over. But
so a shift in focus maybe is quite helpful too. Distraction.
Yeah. But then it's that. And then once I've got over my sort of wallowing, that period does shrink and has shrunk. Now I'm at the point where I think about the fish food and then I'm done. Then you come and look at it more dispassionately.
Mine is sport. So I go and play badminton and netball, and
it's probably a healthier way to look at it rather than the ice cream.
Well, no, the ice cream's involved as well. It's to balance it all up. But yeah, go smash some shuttlecocks and.
Great way of doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. Dayne, what about yourself? How do you mentally prepare and yeah, do you move on from ideas? Do you sort of say no?
I think I sort of maybe do as you do, Fiona. I go and run. Walk. Music is a good escapism, I often find. So I will immerse myself in, either old tunes, something that I can just get lost in, something I like, finding a new band, listening to death to them, and then, just try and immerse myself in
Machine's a good one.
That's a great one.
System of a Down.
Yeah. Just scream and just shout along with her. Yeah, that's definitely a good one. Some Block Party, it's always useful as well. Quite intense, so it's quite fun. But yeah, no, that's how I probably would deal with it. In terms of sort of the preparation for it, I kind of do it a bit like, I don't know how it was with you guys, but when I submitted my thesis for for the PhD, it was almost more of a joyous day than the actual Viva because I'd worked so heavily on it, and once I sort of gave it away, there was nothing I could tinker with, so I could just go, all right, I just have to leave it alone for a bit now and just not think about it. So that's kind of what I do with the grant. It's kind of like I did everything I possibly could on you now. It's up to the gods to decide, right? And so I'll just throw that out there and put it out there. And then I go, right, I've got other stuff to do anyway, so I'm just going to forget about it for a bit. I don't know if that's something that other people do, but I can't control it anymore. It's out there in the ether. And so for me to fret about it for the next, month and a half is kind of futile. I'll just kind of let it go and go work on other things is what I will do.
I love that. Yeah. I think that's a really good approach. I put everything into it, and then once it goes, I try and switch my mentality to, instead of being like, oh, I really want that, I go, if I get this, this is a really cool bonus. And if I don't, then that's the normal status of things. Because I've not lost anything.
No.
I've just not gained it. Unless, apart from when it was the fellowship stuff, because I was like, I might be unemployed.
Yeah. I laugh because that's true. That's really true.
That was a little bit more stressful. What about yourself, Sarah?
So I actually treat myself usually when I have submitted a grant or like little celebration, or because I do think putting in the work and finishing up all that grant writing and getting over, like I'm a terrible time manager, like making it all in and prepping everything in time is sort of, I reward myself maybe with like ice cream or something nice to eat, or but then after that I feel like I'm much like you. I take it out of my mind for the waiting period. I'm not constantly thinking about it while it's in review or while until the decision comes around. And I just go on with other things in life. But I do feel like we deserve to reward ourselves for just having completed the grant writing as well.
Absolutely, 100%. I actually like that as well, because that in itself is an achievement, and that should be celebrated. Yeah, I guess we're kind of coming a little bit to the end of our chat about anything. So just to end on, what advice would you give to someone currently going through their first major rejection what would you say to them? What's your sort of key bit of advice, Sarah?
I've become quite cynical about grants. So I do also tell people, don't let it get to you. I let it get to myself. Of course it hurts, and that's okay too. But remember, think about the statistics, think about the randomness, and think about context and who's reviewing it. I'm a bit cynical about, I think too much time and effort goes into what is more polishing the writing and the marketing of the grant. That doesn't really have anything to do with the science. So what you were saying, your same content grant got funded once when you changed how you presented it with the bullet points. I think that's not a good thing, because I don't think we should be spending our time on polishing the writing. We should be doing good science. So I'm a bit conflicted and cynical about that kind of question. And I think that has only become more prevalent and more prominent over time. Like, grant writing has become more of a writing art than a science art.
That's a very good point. And I think with the introduction of narrative CVs alongside some grants like fellowships, I think this area is still developing on writing style and how that can impact your success at a grant. And sometimes that's something to remember for people, because I wouldn't say that, for example, English wasn't my strongest subject at school. I've always been more maths and science. So for me, writing is a task, very much a task, and I have to really work at it.
There are so many factors that are nothing to do with who you are, how good your science and your idea is, how good a scientist you are, that can determine these outcomes. So really, do not ever let it tell you that you shouldn't be here or that science isn't right for you.
What about yourself, Kate? What's your one bit of advice for someone listening?
Find someone you trust and who is always in your corner. And if you don't have them, get in touch. I'm in everyone's corner.
Yeah, I'm going to take this opportunity to shout out to a couple of my mentors, because I have a really good mentor here, Mike Ashford, whose lab I was in beforehand, but also Yvonne Couch, who's a dementia researcher favourite. She was the one who actually, she gave me a grant that hadn't got funded, but was very close to getting funded. And it was actually from her showing me that grant that I realised that I probably needed to change my writing style. So find a mentor, use the networks that are available, like Dementia Researcher, to find those mentors if you don't have someone in your institute as well. Dayne, what's your bit of advice for anyone listening?
I have, and would continue to tell somebody, it isn't personal. You have to try and separate the science from the person, right? And so it does feel like it's a personal affront and a personal attack. It never should be, and it likely isn't. But it is hard to dissociate yourself from it. But if you do, and in doing so, the other thing I would say is, when you get back comments, maybe give yourself a day to before you read them, because it's so raw that effectively the top line is no, but, and then you can't see the rest of it. You can't see the rest of it, the wood for the trees, because you're just so upset, angry, whatever it is you're feeling at the time. So just give yourself a little bit of time, and then I think somebody said it earlier, that go through it with somebody, and then let them sort of pick out what is actually accurate and what is not. If you've got a good set of mentors or colleagues, they should be able to be brutally honest with you and say, well, this bit is true and this bit's not. And that is actually way more helpful than a yes man in your corner. They're just like, oh, they don't know what they're doing. They don't know what they're talking about. Because otherwise you're just going to end up feeling hurt again, because you have so much vested interest in it being accepted and it being a part of you. It's the science that you actually want to get done is something that you're probably likely getting done because you want to help people. And the idea is the science is supposed to be top notch and good. And all you're getting from people that say yes is just, coaching to not elevate your work again. And whereas if you get some honest feedback that might feel brutal, that's going to elevate your work, and that's what's going to push it forward. So don't take it personally.
And I think one of the things from talking about the initial grant submission, which is getting someone quite critical to read it, which is what Kate did. I also give that same advice for if there's a interview part of that process too. Pick the scariest people in your institute to interview you. It's one of the best things I've done multiple times now, because it will never be as bad as like when you go to that final actual interview, it will be so much nicer than the people who don't have any won't hold back in your institute. Like, definitely go to those scary people and just let them tear you apart. I know it sounds brutal, but it's better in that environment than walking into something like the moment where it does matter and having to then deal with those feelings in the moment. You don't want to have to do that. And that's, again, about building resilience and being able to take on criticism. The other thing that I think is important to point out to listeners is you don't just get one reviewer. You get usually at least 2, if not 3, 4 plus. And what's useful about multiple reviewers is you get a sense of the grant more broadly. So if you have one grumpy reviewer, it tends to stand out, and you can then focus in on the more constructive criticism that you're hopefully getting back. I always remember I put in a grant to do with mouse work, and one of the criticisms was all the fly stuff I was going to do and how I didn't have expertise. And I thought, there's no fly work in this grant. They've clearly copied and pasted from another review. So I was able, and it was interesting, it was one of the later points, and it had been this really brutal review up to this point. And then I just thought, oh my goodness, you haven't read this properly, or you haven't done your review properly. So I'm just going to not even bother wasting energy thinking about that. Multiple reviewers, and just try and focus in on that constructive criticism. So just to kind of summarize our discussion, I would say that we all get rejected. That's the main thing. Everyone gets rejected. It's okay. It's not just you. It's not personal. But resilience is key. And some of the best ways to do that is to build up that resilience before it becomes critical in your career. So build it up by getting that criticism from people that you know, or people who aren't making that ultimate decision. And also, feedback is key. It's key for improving the grant, moving forward with a grant, or even deciding whether a grant should be moved forward or not. I guess something I'd like to add in there, and it's maybe something that Sarah kind of touched on as well, is like how many ideas you have is important. You want a balance, I guess, between not spreading yourself too thin, but having, a few different ideas out there means that you become less maybe invested in just one thing that could get rejected. And I guess taking a break. Just before we finally go, if you could send one anonymous message back to a grant reviewer that maybe sticks in your mind, what would it say? I'll start. Mine would be, I don't work on flies and my name's not spelt like that. Kate, what would your anonymous message be?
Why did you only start referring to me as she when you were talking about my competence?
Ooh, Dayne, I don't know how you follow that. What would your anonymous message?
I'm doing the complete opposite, just being like, you need me, you've clearly not read it properly. What's going on?
Sarah, what's your anonymous message?
It would probably be computational research is real research, and you do not need to be a clinician to work on research regarding diseases. Get with the times.
But also, audience, it is really worth it. Please. I mean, we've been a bit cathartic, I know, but we're all together. We're all in it together.
Yeah. Do you know what? I think there's such a really, in the UK, certainly, there's a really lovely dementia research community. And I just think, resources like Dementia Researcher, but also the Alzheimer's Research UK networks across the country are such great places to for ECRs actually to start trying to get money through small grants and learn that grant writing process. But also, that's a great network to tap into to get people to review your work. You never know whose desk it's going to end up on. So just tap into those networks and get advice and get support. And I think most people do read a grant. And when you start it, you're like, I really want this to be successful. And certainly UKRI ones that land on my desk and it's a dementia one, I'm like, yes, I really want a dementia research grant to be funded by the government. That's really important. So there are reviewers out there that are rooting for you. Just remember that too. That's unfortunately all we have time for this episode / therapy session. Thank you so much to my brilliant guests, Dayne Beccano-Kelly, Sarah Marzi, and Kate Harris. And don't forget that the episode notes are available on the Dementia Researcher website, and you can learn more about our panellists, their work, and resources to deal with grant applications and rejections. I'm Fiona McLean, and you've been listening to the Dementia Researcher Podcast.
Bye!
The Dementia Researcher Podcast was brought to you by University College London with generous funding from the UK National Institute for Health Research, Alzheimer's Research UK, Alzheimer's Society, Alzheimer's Association, and Race Against Dementia. Please subscribe, leave us a review, and register on our website for full access to all our great resources. dementiaresearcher.nihr.ac.uk.